Yep, it should be starting now. All right. So we have actually made it to the beginning of the very first the Canada Files Canada news stream. So not sure if many people are in here at this point, but for any who are, thank you for coming along. We're going to be having some terrific guests. Yep. So while we probably wait a minute or so for people to pull in, I'm gonna do one or two promotional tweets just to let people know that it's starting up. If anyone wants to do that, this is probably the time to do it. So yeah, let's just handle that quickly. I'm keeping an eye on the Twitch chat, by the way, just in case anyone pops in. Okay, we already have 4 people. All right, well, to the people that are in here, hello. And actually, you know what? Change of plans. We already have 4 people in here. So let's introduce. So we have a couple guests as well. I mean, obviously, just for context, I'm the editor-in-chief of the Canada Files, and today on this news stream, which is dedicated to domestic Canadian politics, I'm joined by Shelby Prokop-Millar, David Cassels, and Morgana Adby. Would somebody want to start introducing themselves?
I can
Sure.
go first.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay, sorry. No, David. You can go.
Hey, my name is David. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a writer at the Canada Files. I've written a couple articles focusing mainly on politics in the developing world. I'm also a Ryerson student. You can find me on Twitter at Cassels David, or Instagram at Cassels David, or TikTok at Cassels David, where I talk about politics a little bit and, I don't know, do like fashion videos every so often to, like, I don't know, be a simp for capitalism once in a while. So that's about me.
I'm Shelby. I am a Bachelor of Science Psychology major at York University. I've written for Canada Files as well. I've written 2 articles mainly on policy specifically. And I'm on Twitter at lefty_mind, and I talk about politics. Okay.
Right.
Hi, and I'm Morgana Adby. I also write for the Canada Files. I might be the token liberal on this stream, as I usually am. That's mostly jokes. But basically, I write about a lot of niche topics. I know a lot of information about a lot of very specific things, and that could be really helpful when looking at big picture type of stuff. So I'm really happy to be here, and I'll pitch in where I can.
All right, terrific. So I think basically it probably makes sense to hit on the pocketbook, the moment that is really coming up right now. So we are down a governor general. Julie Payette has resigned due to basically a report alleging that basically she led a workplace that was full of harassment, verbal abuse, and generally a very, very toxic space. Now, this has opened up a question about the future of the governor general position and around the monarchy. So I guess I'm wondering, I guess this question is really twofold. Basically, do people think we should have a governor general? And I guess more in general, do you think there's a place for the monarchy in Canada? So feel free to go, whoever wants to go first.
I can go first. So no, I don't think we should have a monarchy in Canada. I'm personally not for it. We are our own separate country for a reason, so I don't think we should even have a governor general. But I was actually talking to Aiden about something interesting about one of my friends who's Indigenous brought up the whole legal aspect of it, and that right now it would actually they've tied the governor general's position to certain treaties. So there's the whole issue that comes with that. Apparently, when it comes to if you were to remove the governor general, you would have to restart treaties or something. Certain treaties are tied to it, so you'd have to redo them. And so I found that pretty interesting from an Indigenous person's perspective on it. But once again, there is something we need to do to eventually get rid of the monarchy in Canada, because we are our own country for a reason.
Yeah, I'd love to just expand on what Shelby said, because I think that's a really good point, especially with law. For those that don't know, I'm also a legal studies major. And so like the amount that the monarchy is entrenched in that system, as well as all of our institutions, is so deep and so intense. And it's so related to all of these other topics that I just think it would be a logistical nightmare to rid Canada of the monarchy. I don't necessarily have a principled stance on this, in the sense that like I don't think I'm more concerned with like the outcomes and like what matters and like what the impact of having that monarchy is. One thing I will note is that it costs a lot of money, and that's definitely something worth considering when we have an aging population, as well as during this pandemic time in general. Just I forget what Julie Payette's pension will be. But unless I just heard something about the fact that unless basically the Queen's office, on the recommendation of the Prime Minister, takes away like her position or her pension, I believe it will be something around 150K a year, and I will fact check that just to make sure that I'm giving correct information, as David can give his piece in. But yeah, that is a concern.
Yeah, no, all those takes about the Indigenous treaties are really good takes, and I personally hadn't even thought about that. I think that's all really good. My parents and family who are from Britain, so I've got lots of family who are monarchists, probably. But no, I agree 100% with what both of you are saying. I think this whole situation with Julie Payette has really shown a little bit about how redundant and how arbitrary the system that we have in place right now is in Canada, where we have a system where the Governor General is appointed by the Queen, but then she does something, so Trudeau has to ask her to resign, and our head of state is leaving office. And the vast majority of Canadians don't even know who she is or what she does. Meanwhile, she's making 200K a year doing her job. And I don't even know anything about her pension. I'm sure that Morgana is going to brief us more on that, because I don't know anything about that. But I think it really shows how backward the system is. And it's because the ideas that are fundamental to democracy are so separate from the ideas of monarchy. The ideas of someone who is all like the idea, like we had to almost rework the system from the bottom up to make it into a constitutional monarchy where people are voting, who now elect the prime minister, and the prime minister chooses the governor general, and the governor general almost has like very little to do with the Queen's selection, which is like the exact opposite of how the system was designed to work. And I just think that it's arbitrary, and it doesn't have any relation to the vast majority of working class Canadians who couldn't care less who Julie Payette is, or even really who the Queen is, because they're way more concerned with like their material conditions right now than what's going on in the Governor General's office.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's like another area you can look at it too, is that so me being a psych major, it was quite disturbing to me when I found out how terribly treated the people were, and that our government, our prime minister, apparently I think met her at a party, said, oh, apparently you'd be good, and essentially gave her the position without vetting her. And so many people's mental health and so many people's job, just in general, their overall quality at their job could have been much better if the government would have done their job and actually vetted the person getting literally one of the highest positions in the land, is going to be making $200,000 a year, getting $150,000 pension. You would hope that they would be vetted. So on top of that, it's extremely disgusting that our government allowed that on top of it, to essentially just throw someone into one of the most powerful positions.
And just
For
to
sure,
clarify for the viewers, we did check, and CBC's estimate was, yes, 150K pension per year.
Okay. One of the things I think that's basically kind of hasn't been talked about much on this angle, but I was having discussions with the columnist Adam Merigio for the Canada Files, and there's also a bigger problem with the monarchy, which is that they actually hold basically legal powers to basically sack democratically elected leaders. Like, I want to bring up the example of the case of George Whitlam. It's Jay Watts, who's basically, he's the central organizer of the Canadian Communist Party, right? But he had a really good tweet about how basically Australian, obviously Prime Minister Whitlam, basically he was going to go inform Parliament about CIA presence in Australia. This was in 1975. He was summoned by Governor General Kerr, and by invoking his viceregal quote-unquote reserve powers, basically Kerr, the Governor General, was actually able to sack the Prime Minister and force new elections. So basically, there's also basically, you think of it, and I feel like there's one or two more examples I haven't brought up, but there's actual cases of basically monarchical coups against democratically elected center-left governments. So basically, I think that's also like a point of real concern there in terms of like Canadian independence, because I'm on the side on the foreign policy front that Canada has an independent foreign policy, but at the same time, this is one of the examples of actually where there is like foreign control over like the levers of government, and it's kind of like basically it's an anti-left lever. You're not going to have it used against like a Harper or like a Trudeau, but like, I mean, I don't even think someone like Singh would use it, but let's say someone like Matthew Green got into the prime minister's role. For sure, I think there's a good chance that would get used against him. And so that's like one of the biggest dangers. And I think I will give credit to the NDP where it's due. At least some of their MPs are against the monarchy. Now, I'm not so sure about their leadership. The leadership has been, in my view, bad to the point of where it was one of the main reasons why I left the party. But at the same time, yeah, it's a rather interesting front there. I think Shelby, you might be the best person. Like, what's the kind of general like NDP stance, monarchy there? Just curious.
I'm actually not quite sure on it. I think most people who I talk to at least seem to not really be pro-monarchy, maybe like the odd NDP person. But I was actually going to bring up something. I believe that the Governor General also has to sign off on all our bills. So any bill that passes, they're the final check mark it. So technically, you could also maybe even come from the stance that if we want to pass, if let's say for some reason a massive leftist party comes into Canada and we want to do sweeping reforms, specifically pass a major bill that would really reform the 1966 Medicare Act, where we would implement dental care, pharmacare, mental health care, and a bunch of other things. Essentially, let's say that the Governor General, who, I don't know, for some reason would want to come in and say, no, I don't want that. Technically, they can come in and say, I'm not going to verify this bill. Or if we have a minority government, or in some instance, that could occur.
I think that another really important point, just adding on that, is that just because Canada is part of the Commonwealth doesn't mean that we have to have a constitutional monarchy. There's plenty of examples of countries around the world who are part of Commonwealth who don't have constitutional monarchies. Lots of like African countries, for example, have parliamentary republics and are part of Commonwealth. And like this is a really interesting tie where it's like people are really afraid that's going to like lessen our relationship with the United Kingdom. But I don't even know if that's the case when we could still be part of Commonwealth, but not have this archaic system where everything comes down to the Queen's ambassador, essentially. I also am not entirely sure. Actually, I was talking to my mom about this earlier today on the phone, but I think that regardless, it's really hard. And what you're talking about before, Shelby, about the psychology side of it, about the mental health of those involved who worked in the Governor General's office, who faced this toxic work environment. I think that those sorts of things aren't going to go away with a new Governor General. The issue isn't necessarily only Julie Payette. Obviously, she's part of the issue, but the issue is also the fact there's an office in place here which gives people that amount of power to treat their employees like that for that long, that it takes a CBC article with obviously an intensive search from the government into the offices to even make any process on getting rid of her. And even after that, she doesn't apologize. Like a new Governor General is just a new emperor to the same empire. It's just a new leader to the same corrupt system. And I really don't see a way to alleviate any of these potential workplace hazards and these potential abuses of power without rearranging the whole system. That being said, though, I'm very sympathetic to the idea that like this can be damaging to Indigenous treaties. I think that's a very good point that maybe this isn't the most important thing to focus on right now if we're considering like the lives and the treaties and everything that go into reworking Indigenous land treaties. So I do understand like that's also obviously a very valid argument as well.
I need to be a little bit controversial here, and y'all can challenge me on this if you want. But I genuinely do not see this same risk to like Canadian sovereignty or autonomy that you do coming from these positions. The reason why is because they have been so institutionalized within Canadian institutions. The Governor General, like it's such a deep norm, and like this is something that I've looked into, right? So like, this is definitely something that I had that same instinctual reaction on. Though, well, that's on a principled level. They shouldn't have the right to just say, we're not going to pass this. But in reality, that happens so rarely. And the time of governor generals and even lieutenant governors on the provincial level, because the provincial level lieutenant governors were actually historically much more active than, say, your governor general of Canada in terms of like calling elections or prohibiting them from happening, or just interfering in general in some sort of material way. So I really just think that because the norm is so entrenched that you're not going to, in general, be having these issues. And if they do come up, it's going to be in a Canada that is so far away from now that I don't know how to imagine it. Like the idea of the governor general actually intervening, like we have to go through a couple of like really big changes to get to that point. So I just don't know that it's the thing that should be focused on the most. When like at the beginning of this talk, I forget who said it, but someone mentioned that like a very good point, that the governor general position is very disconnected from most Canadians and what they care about, except for a few people that do care deeply about the monarchy. And obviously I think that those people are worth considering as well, because these cultural institutions, right, like they do mean a lot to people. So that's my little spiel on that. Y'all can challenge me if you want.
I probably will. I want to like reference it again. I'll send the this article in the link here, basically, in terms of the coup there, basically. But now, basically, I just want to mention this because basically, there's also, I believe it was Barbados, or there's a Caribbean country or two as well that also basically had a monarchical coup, right? And this is the thing, right? There's like this phrase, I think it was, where like you don't understand the leashes around your neck until you tug. And so basically Canada's never tugged. You see basically what happened. I'll mention basically Australia, basically, and I'll mention the two, which I'll have to try to cite later, admittedly. But I just see it as this, basically. If any sort of insurgent left movement comes with a half decent set of foreign policy, I mean, I'm just looking at this from like someone who's a pretty anti-imperialist, like someone who does. I do not have the slightest trust in terms of basically the rest of the imperialist powers. Like the way I see it, we're in like the imperial core, right? And so basically, if anyone from the imperial core is going to resist, it's going to be crushed as viciously as necessary. And so basically, look, like I said before, like I don't think someone like Jagmeet Singh is going to get a monarchy coup, because he's not going to do enough to truly challenge U.S. foreign policy in any serious way. There'll be some minor things, but it won't be enough to justify anything. But like I said before, basically, and even as someone who basically is like a ML, basically like a socialist, right? Basically, I just find it of great concern, because even if I'm not in the party, and even if I'm not someone who thinks that those policies are anywhere close to enough, basically it still would improve people's lives at the end of the day, right? It would still just be trying to basically help people ignore the contradictions of capitalism at its core, but it would help. It would help people. There's no denying that. And so I just take a great concern there, because the imperial history of the United States, basically, you think of Operation Jakarta, you think of the repeated wars they've been involved in, you think of like Morgana's written about Yemen, for the site a few times. You see like the proxy wars, or Iran coup, constant pressure on them, Venezuela, Bolivia. Basically, in terms of them, and basically you think of it basically this way, right? There's an irony to it in that the UK basically controlled basically the US originally, right? Which is obviously a tool product of colonial genocide. And so basically now it's the case where the US essentially controls the UK. Especially with Brexit now, basically they're extremely reliant on basically the United States for basically economics and support there, right? So with Brexit, actually, I would argue you have an even higher concern about it, because if the US basically goes to, or basically even the UK has issues with Canada foreign policy, basically those powers still exist. Those powers never went away. And so basically, I just think it's of great concern there, really. And I think it's a very ugly question in terms of the treaties, because you don't want to basically rip up any of the treaties at this point. You do not, you frankly do not. You'd have to find a way to maintain, at minimum maintain, right? And because right now they're still a joke. They're still in terms of basically, because at the end of the day, right, this whole country is indigenous land at the end of the day, right? So even the treaties, I think most of us agree aren't really adequate, basically. But at the same time, right, it's still a concern. So I think you have to find the needle in the little hole there, because I just view getting any ways that you can limit the risk of U.S. interference in our politics, basically is important, because our own politics and our own policy, it sucks. But basically, if we manage to pull off some sort of semi-miracle and have a half decent government involved, there's a high chance they might get targeted there. So I just think it's of really, really huge importance there. I mean, anyone else have thoughts on that? I feel like Morgana, you probably will. So
I was going to ask a question if you don't mind, or
Yeah,
sorry,
sure.
I don't want to cut off anyone.
No, go ahead.
I will
go ahead.
remember. I will remember. Don't worry.
But I don't want to also like change topic too much, so feel free to just like ignore what I'm asking. The question I was going to ask is, what system would we put in place of the existing system, of the existing constitutional monarchy? And the reason that I asked that is because I think that there's lots of boomers who, when you talk to them and you tell them we want to get rid of the system, their biggest complaint is, well, what are you going to replace it with? Like, what comes next? And what are some examples of the countries who have done this and have a different system now? And I think that's an interesting question to at least like talk about, because I feel like oftentimes there's older people who want that sort of specifics of, we're going to do this, or we want it to look like this, instead of just like, it's easy to brush away young people who want to say, oh, we just want to change the system, where it's a lot harder to say, well, this system will be better and for these reasons. And I'm interested to know like what you guys think are some possible alternatives to a constitutional monarchy that would work in Canada and would establish democracy, at least in some extent, if that's obviously the purpose or whatever.
Yeah, so I actually really like that you brought that up, because it's like very much related to what I wanted to add on to what Aiden said. Because while the idea of like fighting imperialism obviously speaks to me on many different levels, at the same time, I don't know if these actual positions and these titles are what's actually going to be the substantive change. I think these positions and these titles, they're ways of organizing ourselves that we use if it suits us. That's kind of how I look at it. So what really needs to be done to like combat imperialism isn't take away these positions that, as we've kind of established, in general don't do much anyway, but maybe instead look at like positions that actually do have power over the types of things that we're talking about. Because like Aiden, you're talking about the US intervening and being concerned about that. But I think I think that in terms of Canada and Canada's relations, it may be a little bit reductive to say that the UK is being controlled by the US now, because the UK has such a role in shaping everything that's been happening here, right? So like, we can look at where that influence has like made certain things happen the way they've happened, and then actually change those sorts of things, those sorts of positions up. And when I look